For staying with us, there are concerns on the increase in cases against the LGBTQI plus community. At the end of June, there were 42 cases being investigated, including 30 for murder and 12 for rape. This highlights a need to apply resources to ending violence against this community. Yesterday, Deputy Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, Jeffery, gave an update on government's efforts to address hate crimes against the LGBTQI plus people, and he joins us now to talk more on this. Deputy Minister, good evening, and thank you so much for your time. Certainly, we've been seeing cases that have been disturbing in the media. As you know, these attacks have really been gruesome. Members of the LGBTQI plus community have really been decrying the attention that these cases really are receiving. What then are the interventions that government is proposing at this stage?
The first one really is to ensure that each crime is properly investigated, hopefully then there's enough evidence to arrest people, to charge them, to prosecute them, and ultimately to convict them. And that is happening in certain cases. From the national level, we have a national task team on violence against LGBTIQ plus people, which was established in 2011 by the then Minister of Justice, Jeffery. And that has under it a rapid response team which is tracking all these cases. They had their last meeting last week, and that involves basically justice officials, NPA, and SAPS, and then some people from civil society. So each case is being tracked. There have been some, as I'd outlined yesterday, some successes in terms of 8 cases that were finalized recently. A case from Davidson where 25 years of imprisonment was given for rape. A case in Ikhaneng, 25 years imprisonment for murder. Umlazi, 14 years for rape. It's 25 years for the Umlazi case, 14 years for rape in Greytown in KZN, and so on. So the key thing is really, the first key thing is to ensure that these cases are prosecuted, and that would hopefully act as a deterrent. Then we've got to look at the issues of what's causing this. We have seen an increase in the number of hate crimes, or particularly murders of lesbian, gay, and transgender people this year. It's spread around the country. It's not something that's nationally connected. It's basically happening in individual communities. And the issue really is to find out why this is happening, and then to look at engaging with those sectors that are homophobic and intolerant and wanting to kill people of different sexual orientation or gender identity, and looking at trying to get them to change their minds.
And has this national task team got to the bottom of that question you asked there as to why, and have there been any engagements then with some of these communities?
Look, it's still something we're engaging civil society on in the national task team as to what should government be doing, apart from the obvious matters of the prosecutions. What should government be doing? We are trying to get each case, the recent cases, some kind of analysis as to what caused it, what were the circumstances, where the victim is, where the perpetrator is known, what was the relationship, if any, with the perpetrator, why was the perpetrator homophobic, that kind of thing. So work is still being done on that, because we need to target our interventions. It's no use because there was, say, a murder in Ntuzuma, having a engagement in Ntuzuma without targeting the right sectors that really need to hear the message.
And Deputy Minister, surely I do think, though, government can admit that it's taken too long. I mean, 2011 and 2021, that's a huge gap. And for still this task team to be sitting to try and get to the bottom of why this is currently taking place, because this particular community is really worried for their safety, and rightfully so. But certainly when we hear that between 2011 and 2021, there hasn't been any movement towards talking to these communities and some of these people that are behind this and why exactly this is happening. It may be disheartening for some who are listening tonight.
Yeah, sorry, maybe I've created the wrong impression. It's not saying that nothing has been done. There have been lots of engagements with different communities. What I was talking about was specifically the cases, and I think it's about 18 of them that have happened this year, and establishing what the intervention should be in those communities for those cases this year. The task team was formed when there was a problem specifically of the so-called corrective rape, where lesbian women or women perceived to be lesbian were being raped by men who thought that having sex with them would change their sexual orientation. Luckily, that has died down. That has reduced or had reduced up until recently around the country. So it's not as if nothing has been done. There have been lots of engagements with different sectors, traditional leaders, religious leaders, specific communities. Obviously, it's more difficult engaging now during the level 4 lockdown, but community radio stations and things like that. So there's been a lot of engagement going on. So it's not as if people have just been sitting back doing nothing.
And one of the things that they really are crying about is the bill that is currently sitting before Parliament that could be able to help, fight this particular scourge that we're sitting with. And some have even criticized the department that you work for, that nothing has been done to try and push Parliament to fast-track this process. Talk to us then about the efforts that you've made on your end to try and ensure that this is, dealt with as speedily as possible.
Yeah, well, we introduced the bill into Parliament in 2018, so that is some time ago. Unfortunately, the last Parliament couldn't, they put it out for public comment, but they didn't process it because they wouldn't have been able to finish it. But one of the main problems is that there are 2 outstanding Constitutional Court judgments that are awaited on the issue of hate speech, which is one of the crimes created in the bill. And everybody is waiting for judgment in those cases because the way you word the crime will depend on what the court ultimately rules on, what are the limits of free speech. So that is effectively the delay. So I understand why Parliament is not processing or not continuing with it. They're waiting for the judgment. The case was argued, the Kwelane case on homophobia was argued last year. So hopefully the court will come out with a judgment. But we also can't, it's a separate arm of state, so we can't exactly pressurize the Constitutional Court as government to come out with a judgment. But that's been the hold-up. But let me just say the other aspect of the bill is that I know people are frightened, angry, desperate, but the bill is not a panacea. It's not going to, these murders, rapes, these are already crimes. So what the hate crimes bill does is take existing crimes and make them hate crimes if there's a motive that you don't like the group that the person belongs to or is perceived to belong to. And then it becomes a hate crime, then it's more serious. But murder and rape are already serious. It will help in some of the minor crimes like assault, which is generally seen as quite minor. It will then, hate speech has not been there before in our law. We've got most of the prosecutions are under the common law crime of criminal injuria. So this is trying to make a statutory crime. And then it's provisions that it will help with issues of recording hate crimes in the system, the police and the prosecution system. But laws don't necessarily prevent crimes on their own. It's the implementation and it's the attitude of society. Why are people attacking other people because of their sexual orientation, which effectively is who they love, how they project themselves from a gender perspective? Why are people doing that, and how do we stop that? Obviously, from the state side, we're trying to, or we're ensuring that where crimes are committed, they're properly investigated, and hopefully people can be prosecuted and have heavy sentences. But the issue is what's feeding it. And how do we deal with that?
And I know you touched on, the hate speech part of the bill. We have seen a lot that has been said in the public discourse around this, and I'd like to borrow then from some reports and one written by, in fact, quoting constitutional law expert Pierre de Vos. He says, while the bill has laudable aims, the sections of the draft bill dealing with hate speech is not without its problems. The fear is that in its current form, the bill might well be used by those with economic, social, or political power to silence their critics and to end difficult discussions around race, gender, and sexuality, among other things. And then he continues to say, as it currently reads, it does not take account of the fact that the impact of hateful speech on those who have suffered and continue to suffer from patterns of disadvantage and harm will be far more severe than on those who are politically, socially, and economically privileged and are not systematically subjudicated, but because of their race, gender, or sexuality. What's your response then to this particular observation by Pierre de Vos?
Yeah, well, look, on the second part of the impact of the hate speech, I mean, there is provision for victim impact statements when it comes to sentencing. So I'm not sure, I'm not entirely following that argument. On the issue of the wording of the bill, that is really, in a sense, precisely why Parliament has to wait for the Constitutional Court judgment to define what are the limits of free speech. Currently in the bill, the issue, there's a whole lot of issues. Do you need to incite harm for something to be hate speech? Which means if you just say something incredibly nasty or even racist or homophobic, but you're not actually saying that somebody must be attacked, that it would be more difficult to argue that you are inciting harm. So that's precisely the reason why Parliament has to wait for the Constitutional Court to give a ruling on these issues. The issue before the Constitutional Court is a civil law, PAPUDA, the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act, but some of the provisions in the hate crimes and hate speech bill are similar.
And you'd agree, though, that some who are raising concerns even around practical things like the representation of gender in its wholeness, in things like basic things like a form, an application form, that are not reflective of gender diversity, and really it makes it difficult for this, the community of LGBTQI plus people to feel that there is an element of inclusion if they have to be met with an application form that simply is not reflective of who they are as well. What then needs to be done to ensure that change goes even as far as that basic level, to ensure that some of the rights that are enshrined in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are indeed realized by this community?
Yeah, look, I filled up an official form today in terms of registering for the COVID vaccine and noted that they wanted your gender and the options were male, female, or other. So to some extent there was an expression, or there was an allowance for people to put something other than male or female. Another aspect is that Parliament passed the first non-gendered bill recently, earlier this year, which was the cybercrime bill, which has now been signed into law by the President. There's no he's or she's in that act. There's only they, the more collective pronoun. So there are movements in that regard. But obviously these are all issues which we need to engage on and see how best that they can be addressed.
I do want to say to you, though, that other is simply not enough. Would you agree?
Well, I guess it's what's practical, what isn't. there's a number of different possibilities that could be there. The whole concept is people that are gender non-conforming or different gender expression, it's again, as I said, something that we need to engage on with society, with civil society, and look at what we can come up with.
Certainly, we do appreciate your time. It is indeed something that, others have even written about, to say that they would like to be included in some of these forms. But thank you so much for your time, Deputy Minister. We certainly do appreciate it. That was Deputy Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, John Jeffery. Let's take a recap.